On this Saturday night, the Canadian city with the most COVID-19 cases. The stark projections as restrictions are relaxed.
The last thing people want is a few weeks from now being told, okay, we loosened the rules and now COVID's spreading again.
Should provinces rethink reopening? The economic outlook, jobs lost, now could be permanent in the U.S. Plus, no pool, no problem.
It's like a fish out of the sea, basically.
A Canadian athlete makes hay of her training. And he broke musical barriers. Now the big voice of Little Richard is silenced.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. There is a warning tonight from Quebec's Public Health Institute that deaths could spike if physical distancing measures are lifted. New projections show deaths in the Greater Montreal area could rise to 150 a day by July, and new cases could soar to 10,000 a day by June. Montreal has recorded more than 18,000 cases of COVID-19 and over 1,700 deaths. It's by far the hardest hit municipality in the country. Quebec has already delayed its reopening plans for Montreal until the end of the month. It's a dilemma that many provinces may face in the coming weeks as more steps are taken to relax restrictions. Whether labeled too cautious or too lenient, as Abigail Bimman reports, it's all a balancing act.
Ottawa's famed Tulip Festival, now mostly virtual, but the National Capital Commission had to admit our bad, promising to take down signs telling people they can't snap photos in the public parks.
It doesn't frighten me to take a picture with a tulip, and if it frightens a person next to me, they can just wait their turn and take their picture.
A flowery example of the balancing acts underway. As Ontario announces it will reopen provincial parks, it's also so short on frontline help, it's working to get school board staff like custodians and psychologists into long-term care homes and hospitals.
We are committed to ensuring that their staff could enter safely, could make a difference, could retain their own benefits.
I don't think we can all stay locked down until there's a vaccine. There might never be one, but I'm worried that people will move too fast.
Again, that balance.
I understand the economic pressures we're all under, and I understand how much people do want to go outside. But we need to do it in ways that we are sure are going to keep people safe. Because the last thing people want is a few weeks from now being told, okay, we loosened the rules and now COVID's spreading again and you're all going to have to go inside for the rest of the summer.
The Prime Minister consistently careful not to weigh in on any province's plans, saying he's concerned about his home province, Quebec, just as he is about the rest of the country. Yet hard-hit Quebec is the only province with a set date to reopen schools. Reopening comes with its own challenges. New Brunswick issued this detailed guide, including what to do if you can't keep 2 meters apart.
There's ways to be creative. Can you put barriers up in such a way? Do you have booths in your restaurant that can, maybe if you put up a piece of plexiglass or something that raise the top of the booth a little higher?
Pay for it all now.
Businesses in other provinces feel they've been given no specific guidance. This small Toronto hardware store decided themselves they'd let 3 people in at a time, plus curbside pickup.
We feel that we can offer one-on-one assistance and tell the customers about the products without them coming in and touching things.
As each business tries to juggle safety with economics, too. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Here's a look at the situation in Canada tonight. More than 67,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19, and more than 4,600 people have died. Ontario is nearing 20,000 confirmed cases, adding more than 300 in the last 24 hours. More than 1,500 people have died in that province. Army and Navy is the latest Canadian retailer shutting its doors for good. All 5 locations in Alberta and BC were temporarily closed in March. But in a statement, the CEO claims the economic challenges of COVID-19 have proven insurmountable. Just days ago, the family-run company marked its 101st anniversary. The U.S. lost 20.5 million jobs in April, the highest in that country's history. Economists predict some workers who were temporarily laid off could lose their jobs permanently. And as Jennifer Johnson explains, some businesses may be looking to workers who aren't vulnerable to the new coronavirus.
Economists say America's already bleak unemployment numbers could get even worse. While April's jobless rate was the highest in history, experts say May's unemployment level could climb even higher, hitting 20%.
May's going to be another tough month. These are numbers that are full of hardship and heartbreak.
A report from Main Street America, a group that represents 300,000 small businesses, predicts the pandemic will force 7.5 million small businesses to close for good. A University of Chicago study shows 42% of those temporarily laid off will never get their jobs back.
There's no way that many of these that are hardest hit in the food services industry, leisure and hospitality are going to be able to come back to the level of activity that they did prior to the crisis.
Unemployment is now at 14.7%. In February, it was 3.5%. Even as states and businesses reopen, the future is filled with uncertainty for millions of workers.
I'm basically at my breaking point, worried, nervous, scared.
It won't go back to business as usual for some big corporations, too. Some manufacturers may use robots instead of people, as social distancing rules make assembly lines less efficient.
I really think that we're entering a new age when the ideas that maybe worked well in the 20th century are not going to be viable in the future where technology just becomes vastly more powerful.
U.S. President Donald Trump is fighting to keep his job, too, up for re-election in November. For 3 years, he's taken credit for America's strong economy. Now all he can do is sound optimistic about it quickly bouncing back.
It's going to be transition to greatness.
But experts tell a different story.
What we're going to see is the economy move in fits and starts and really struggle to recover.
Many economists predict it will be several months, but more likely years, before America's economy will be nursed back to health. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
The U.S.-Canada border has been closed to non-essential travel since late March, but that mutual agreement is set to expire later this month. Some premiers say it's far too soon to even consider lifting cross-border travel restrictions. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson spoke with a former U.S. ambassador to Canada about the relationship with our neighbors to the south in the time of COVID-19. Mercedes?
Robin, President Donald Trump has made no secret of his desire to reopen the American economy despite the high rates of COVID-19 in the United States. And while the Canada-U.S. border has been closed for 7 weeks now, the agreement in place that closed it is set to expire on May 21st. That's less than 2 weeks away. And while the Liberal government says there is no way the border is reopening anytime soon, what happens if President Trump won't negotiate an extension to the current agreement? And what happens if Canada doesn't want to open up on Trump's timeline? I put that question to former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, James Blanchard, who's also the former governor of Michigan.
Do you think that there is a potential risk that the Canadian government runs afoul of President Trump if they don't agree to open the Canadian border when he wants to open the American one? And this is something the Prime Minister Trudeau has had to deal with before, and a lot of Canadians are worried, what might the president do if we're not on the same schedule?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, he's a fairly abnormal personality, to say the least. One minute he attacks Canadians, next minute he talks about how great they are. I would look more to the Secretary of State Pompeo or our Commerce Secretary, our people there. Look, most of the members of Congress, Senate, and House, all the governors consider Canada a very valuable partner that needs to be listened to and worked with, not lectured to or undermined. And that's as far as I'm concerned, that's the reality. The president is not often dealing with reality, whether he's recommending Clorox to disinfect yourself or foolishly labeling steel from Canada as a national security threat.
We'll have more on how what's happening south of the border will affect us economically and politically right here in Canada tomorrow on the show. Robin?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. The UK is imposing another 14-day quarantine to stop a second wave of COVID-19. That is preventing seasonal workers from traveling to work on farms. But the fresh fruit and vegetables are ready to be picked. And as Crystal Goomansingh reports, Brits are now being asked to roll up their sleeves.
An upbeat, hard sell for an honest day's work. Brits are being called on to help put food on tables and keep a multi-billion-dollar industry alive.
It hasn't been easy. It's not easy work. Physically, it's very demanding. And if you haven't picked lettuces or you haven't picked asparagus before, it tests out muscles that you probably didn't realize you had.
Fitness is not a requirement. Workers just need to be available and virus-free. Border closures because of the pandemic mean the usual 70,000 seasonal workers, mostly from Eastern Europe, aren't available.
There's been a really, really good response. There have been lots and lots of good success stories of Brits who volunteered for these jobs.
I've got 3 children, so I need to be working. I'm self-employed as a bricklayer.
Relying on locals to ensure the food supply is really the only option at this point. It's not as if the UK can turn to one of its neighbours and ask to import produce, because at this point, with the lockdown and the pandemic, most nations are in the exact same position.
In Mexico, assembly line workers are being shifted outdoors, sent into fields with masks to pick berries so they won't rot and go to waste. Then there's the issue of buyers. With restaurants and cafes closed in many countries around the world, demand has plummeted. Some American communities have resorted to giving away potatoes and liters of milk. Canada is looking to hit pause on some of these issues. The government unveiled a $252 million aid package for the agricultural industry. The reopening of markets, however, could also pose challenges.
There's still a lot of nervousness amongst growers because as hopefully we move out of lockdown and the recovery program starts and people start to return to work, that we'll start to lose people from farms.
In a normal season, farmers face many uncontrollable factors. The pandemic poses a new, long-lasting challenge for producers right around the world. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Spring planting is taking a pause this weekend in parts of eastern Canada. Check out this whiteout in Fredericton this morning. A polar vortex is causing temperatures to plunge. Toronto came close to setting a new record with a low of -4.7. The winter-like weather caused the snowbirds to postpone the Operation Inspiration flight over southern Ontario today. The team tweeted, "We said snowbirds, not snow." It's a much different story on the other side of the country. Vancouver beaches are busy with temperatures climbing above 20 degrees. Other regions of BC are closing in on 30 degrees this weekend. Provincial health authorities are reminding people that congregating in large groups is still not okay and to maintain a safe social distance. Coming up, sidewalks and social distancing, how city planners are changing spaces. In most cities, sidewalks are not set up for social distancing, yet that will be a norm for some time. To give people some space, cities like Madrid, Seattle, and Toronto are turning roads into walkways. Reggie Cicchini explains.
Social distancing.
Social distancing.
Social distancing.
Easy to say, much more difficult to practice. For decades, the car has been king of the urban jungle, but COVID-19 has now ended that reign.
When we close our streets to cars, we open them up for amazing possibilities.
Streets now lay bare, while sidewalks are teeming with activity, posing a challenge: how to put distance between all those feet.
Why are the pedestrians in the leftover space? The pedestrians should be in the primary space.
To slow the spread, we have had to spread out, but that is a hard thing to do when space is a rare commodity.
You can't touch this.
Street signs, trees, and people all pose problems for anyone trying to keep a safe distance. 6 feet or 2 meters requires a lot of room.
People all over Oakland are walking and biking in streets that they normally would not.
In Oakland, the sidewalks have spilled out onto 119 kilometers of closed streets, while New York City is retrofitting some of its iconic thoroughfares.
You have less traffic. You need streets open so people can walk.
Cities are very quickly adapting how the streets are used from primarily being really for cars to being places for people, which is what we need more than ever.
And as economies come back online, allowing for the safe use of space is critical. Lines for Toronto businesses will form in empty curb lane parking spots, while some European restaurants are now serving sips and snacks in streets and plazas.
It is part of this new normal, and we're going to find that in many places we're going to have to readjust.
COVID-19 has proven that city planning is sometimes based on old ideas, but a city is only as healthy as the people who call it home.
Thinking about public spaces not as something that's frivolous, but rather as essential to creating good urbanism and great density, that's where we need to go in the future.
And with social distancing playing a large role in that future, a safe space to practice it is all but essential. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Still ahead, how Canadian athletes are training with no gyms. With gyms and fitness centers closed, this pandemic may have you feeling out of shape. Home workouts may cut it for some, but for Olympic-level athletes, the stakes are too high to lose strength. That's why one Canadian is pooling all of her resources to prepare for Tokyo 2021. Mike Drolet explains.
2020 was supposed to be the year Kira Christmas's lifelong Olympic water polo dream came true.
Qualifying for Canada is just like the best feeling. I get emotional. Whew.
But then the pandemic hit, and the Tokyo Olympics, like all major sporting events, were canceled. And around the world, thousands of athletes were left like the rest of us, stuck at home. And just like us, they had to make do with what they had. So Toronto Raptor Serge Ibaka did sprints in his condo. Canadian softball player Emma Carr bench pressed her bed. And Mitch Marner of the Toronto Maple Leafs played keep away with his dog. The athlete at home workout can get a little weird too. Swimmer Brent Hayden used toilet paper rolls in place of weights, and gymnast Max Whitlock used a couch in place of a pommel horse, which made no sense because he also had a pommel horse outside. But arguably none went so far as Kira Christmas, who was desperate to avoid taking a step back in her training.
Like, you lose your shape as an aquatic athlete so fast that it's a little scary thinking how long we're actually going to be out of the water. It's like a fish out of the sea, basically.
What she needed was a pool, but none of the above-ground models were deep enough to allow her to tread water. So the Christmases went shopping for hay bales and began construction on a pool fit for the prairies.
Well, I will say for sure that we've always kind of been a little bit crazy.
Crazy, or are they just creative? Because now Kira can continue her training. Although if the water was any colder, it would turn to ice.
I think a lot of people were just kind of shocked at the length that I went to get a pool.
No, they're not. But that's why she'll be an Olympian. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Up next, Little Richard's legacy, the kingdom left behind by the king of rock and roll. Before there was the Tiger King, Siegfried and Roy were at the top of the big cat kingdom. Today, the entertainment world is mourning one half of that dynamic duo. Roy Horn passed away yesterday from complications related to COVID-19. Horn and longtime partner Siegfried Fischbacher were renowned for incorporating white tigers and other large cats into their magic act. They got their start on cruise ships and later became one of the longest-running acts on the Las Vegas Strip. Roy Horn was 75. The world is looking back at the life and legacy of Little Richard, a rock legend whose hits inspired a generation of musicians, from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones. Little Richard is labeled one of the founding fathers of rock and roll. He was flamboyant and vocal. Here's Eric Sorensen.
If rock and roll was a music revolution in the 1950s, as much as anyone, Little Richard led the rebellion. More than Elvis or other artists, Little Richard shocked conservative America. Black, ostentatious, glittery, no one had seen anything like him.
My friends thought I was crazy, and my cousins thought I was a kook.
His wailing energy that drew from gospel and the blues won over white kids and black. That and the suggestive lyrics of a song like Tutti Frutti saw his music banned in parts of the segregated South.
They didn't want the white kids to listen to black music.
But they did listen, and no one could take their eyes off him. He left music for a while to become a preacher, but his influence was seminal. He inspired the likes of Mick Jagger, James Brown, Rod Stewart, and he influenced one of his own opening acts called the Beatles.
All other way, I said, woo, he loved that.
Another Beatle, Ringo Starr, is among the music icons honoring Little Richard, posting one of my all-time musical heroes. Beach Boy and innovator Brian Wilson said he showed us all how to rock and roll, and Spike Lee called him one of the true creators. Little Richard was featured in a Spike Lee ad that turned Spike into Michael Jordan.
Look, Mom, I can fly.
For years, he felt his groundbreaking impact wasn't fully recognized.
And the best new artist is...
Little Richard once stole the show at the Grammys.
Me. I have never received nothing. You all never gave me no Grammy.
And yet, Little Richard was in the first group of inductees in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986.
I'm blessed. I've stood the test.
Little Richard sang into his 70s. He was fearless and he was an original. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight with a little more of Little Richard. Thank you for watching. Good night.
To the east, to rock to the west.